Welcome to today's webinar, and today we're going to be featuring the module Decision Making. My name is Michelle Lambert-Yuhasz, and I am part of the TIER team here at the University of Texas at Austin. Today I have a special guest who will be spotlighting the pathway Increasing Data Literacy today, and her name is Dr. Jannette Reyes, and she is from the Region 1 Educational Service Center here in Texas. And she has collaborated with us on creating this particular pathway that she's going to be spotlighting. But before I turn it over to her, let's just recap what our project is all about, as well as introduce this particular module. So as you recall, we are one of 9 technical assistant networks, and we're funded by the Texas Education Agency. We were previously referred to as Intervention Best Practices. However, we renamed our network. So if you look at the top of this slide, we renamed it to Tiered Interventions Using Evidence-Based Research, or TIER for short. TIER is designed to provide a comprehensive and coherent plan for intervention best practices across the state of Texas. So we have collaborated with many people in order to come up with these comprehensive resources in order to support your learning efforts. And so we collaborated with Texas Regional Service Centers, as well as some school districts, as well as universities across the United States and National Technical Assistance Centers. And we had these individuals collaborate with us in order to develop professional learning content and resources, and we organized them within 10 modules, as you can see here on the slide. I'll give you a moment to look at those. Now, as you recall, each one of these modules contain a set of materials. So you can go to each one of these modules and they're going to have a set of materials. And these materials consist of presentations, handouts, and videos, and a plethora of resources. They are there for you to be used to support your professional learning opportunities with your stakeholders or your own personal professional learning. Each module, each one of these 10 modules is designed to comprehensively meet the needs of your stakeholders. Now, each one of these modules can be taken in its entirety, and if you choose to take an entire module as a whole, it can take anywhere from 3 to 20 hours, depending on the module and how much content is within that particular module. However, you can actually choose your own adventure in a sense that you can just choose maybe one pathway that you want to explore or a couple pathways. So for example, today we're going to be spotlighting the module Decision Making, as you see down here in the bottom. This particular module has 10 different presentations or 10 different pathways. So you can explore that module in its entirety, which would take approximately maybe 20 hours to complete the whole module, or you can choose one pathway to explore. And so let's look at what those 10 different pathways are with the decision-making module. So as you can see here, the decision-making module has 10 individual pathways that you can explore. So you can explore the whole module as a whole, or you can choose one of these pathways in order to explore it and use it as your own professional learning or to support the learning of your stakeholders. Now keep in mind, this module as a whole focuses on the importance of maximizing the skills of a team of educators while imparting a problem-solving mindset with an understanding of data. So having that understanding of what data is and how it impacts our high-quality instructional delivery decisions. Participants will learn throughout all of these different pathways in this whole module, and they will learn to make decisions with an understanding of diagnostic assessments and the purpose of comprehensive evaluations in the area of reading, writing, math, behavior, dyslexic, as well as incorporating and implementing cultural and linguistically responsive practices within all. Okay, so the goal of this entire module is to assist educators with the aspect of using assessment data to effectively better serve all of our students with their instructional needs to ensure success and achievement. So without further ado, we're going to have Dr. Reyes. She is going to spotlight this particular pathway right here, increasing data literacy. She's going to pull out this pathway and she's going to spotlight it. She's just going to showcase so that when she is done, you're going to have a true taste of what this entire pathway would encompass. You're going to enjoy it. You're in for a treat. She has a lot of expertise in this particular area. So without further ado, Dr. Reyes, go ahead and take it over.
Thank you, Michelle, for that introduction. And thank you all for being here today. Our topic of the day is increasing data literacy. And I want to take you to maybe a time when you and your colleagues were sitting, talking, and looking at data. Perhaps this was a situation where you were in a grade level meeting or a staff meeting at a campus, or perhaps at the district level and you have a data teams that are looking at your summative data, whatever it might be. And so I want you to ask yourself, what were the data that you were looking at? What were some of the conversations centered around those pieces of data? And then what conclusions did you come up with? In this module, we're going to look at 3 distinct sections. So this first part of the presentation, I'll introduce you to the concept of data literacy for teachers. That includes a conversation about the skills that are needed to be able to work in data teams and to engage in collaborative data inquiry. I will also discuss some of the types of data that we use in schools. Secondly, you will learn about the types of metacognitive knowledge that consumers of data need to select, interpret, and use data effectively. Equally important is how do we apply that knowledge that we gained from professional development opportunities for assessing student progress. Finally, we're going to look at ways and how bias can skew data and data interpretation. Here are the learning objectives for this pathway, and take a moment to familiarize yourself with these objectives. As you read through them, think about any language that might be new to you. As I said before, I'm going to introduce you to this term, this idea of data literacy for teaching. And as I was doing the research for this presentation, I came across an author that just kept popping up everywhere, and I started looking for this information further. And it was Dr. Ellen Mandenack, and she was the one that really started putting some momentum to this whole idea about the competencies, the dispositions, and the skills that teachers need to be able to utilize data properly. And so she calls it data literacy for teaching. I want to begin also with a conversation of what exactly is formative data, because that is the data that is closest to our classroom and to the students. So if you look at the definition on the screen here, the words along the way are emphasized because it's important for teachers to assess student learning during instruction in real time and make adjustments as needed to the instruction. So we'll discuss the importance of formative data later on in this presentation. Now I'll take another moment to read this definition of data-based decision-making. And as you read, notice the different competencies that are described here. Now, it might sound pretty obvious that teachers know how to collect data and how to examine the data and so on. However, there's different types of data, and we need to organize our data in a way that gives us the most bang for our buck, and to know that what types of data is best for which decision that we're making. Because data has a certain purpose or focus, as you will learn later in this presentation. So as I mentioned earlier, the data literacy for teachers, idea, or DLFT, which I will refer to that from now on. It's this ability to transform information into actionable steps. And what we know about data is that data needs to be not only actionable, but it also needs to be accurate, which means that we don't leave bits and pieces out of the data just for the sake of that conversation, that we present the data fully. Data also needs to be appropriate for the intended audience, and knowing that we might have to adjust the way that we present the data for certain types of audiences. So again, DLFT is that we make data actionable, that it informs our practices, and that we look at all different types of data, not just one, that we overlay the data in terms of maybe looking at student assessment, and then we look at, do some school climate inventories of your community, your family members and parents and students and teachers as well. We also look at behavioral snapshots and see where are we as a whole campus, and as a school district for that matter. You know, what types of infractions are happening in terms of behavioral, and then what types of supports do we need to provide for those campuses, and professional development for teachers. So data literacy for teachers, as you see on the slide, it combines an understanding of data with the standards, the teaching standards. And then we have to know our discipline, and we have to know our practice. Not only that, the alignment of the curriculum to the assessment and to the instruction. How do students learn, and how do students retain and retrieve information? So that's all inclusive in this idea of data literacy for teachers. Additionally, DLFT includes attitudinal, motivational behavior, and health indicators rather than just student performance alone. So let's kind of dissect each one of these individually. Attitudinal doesn't only apply for the learner, but also for the teacher. So how does this student interpret their relationship with the teacher? Does the student feel accepted? Is this a risk-free learning environment that we want to create, we are creating? Does the student feel psychologically safe with in the presence of this teacher, in terms of, you know, could there be potential bullying or humiliation? So all of that is part of the DLFT. And we also look at how motivated is the teacher to reach out to the student that is struggling perhaps. So finally, the quotation on the slide mentions how these health indicators, and these indicators include considerations for physical safety and mental health safety, because all of these, as we know, affect student engagement and performance and motivation. As I mentioned earlier, it's important that we know which type of data that we're looking at and for what purpose it was intended, and then what's the focus? Is it on the classroom scale, or is it a larger scale? So the data that we choose can be also summative or formative, depending on what we're attempting to achieve. If we're going to enhance our data literacy for using in the MTSS model, we need to understand the different purposes and uses of data. This slide is based on the 4-quadrant model, and it was proposed by Susan Brocard. Again, when I was researching to find information for this module, I came across this. It was so compelling because it started giving me this really good way of thinking about our data and thinking about even overlapping the data to get a more refined view of what is going on with student achievement and maybe student behavior and motivation and so on. So the first, you will notice that it's sectioned off into 4 distinct areas. We have the interim benchmark assessments, also known as combative formative assessments. We have accountability assessment data that's given at the district, school, district, state, national, or international level. And then we have classroom grades or summative assessment data, also known as report card grades, and classroom formative assessment strategies. Note that on the left side of this figure, we have large scale assessments, and then we have on the bottom, the ones on the top are large scale, the ones on the bottom are more classroom focused. And then we have on the bottom of this, the arrows show that the items on the left-hand side are more formative focused, and the ones on the right-hand side are more summative focused. Let's go through each of these individually. And let's begin with classroom formative assessment strategies. And you're going to notice that this quadrant represents assessments that are more formative in purpose, they're classroom focused, and this is happening in real time. The teacher is gathering information, gathering data in the moment, and providing students feedback. And I really like this one book that I read, that formative assessment gives students feedback that feeds them forward. So it also gives the teacher feedback that feeds the teacher forward in terms of planning, maybe making adjustments and adaptations to the delivery of instruction or to the materials used, or maybe adjusting the activity or the content somewhat. And so this is the finest grain of data that we can get, is the classroom formative assessment data. The primary consumers for these data are the students and the teachers. So let me explain that one. The students get a learning, they understand their learning path and where is the teacher trying to go. And then the students also keep track of their own progress, not only for motivation, but also to maybe share with the family and to celebrate those successes and milestones along the way. The teacher uses these formative assessment data that's gathered to not only maybe adjust small group instruction or group students, but also make adjustments to interventions as needed. The teacher might also use formative assessment data to inform instruction and notice if a large majority of the students are not achieving well, that gives the teacher feedback to make adjustments along the way before maybe that test is given for that content. Above the formative assessment in this figure is the interim benchmark assessments. And these are common formative assessments. You might know them as maybe your district benchmarks. And these data can be disaggregated and used by teachers. These data also serve as checkpoints throughout the school year to help inform instruction. And it helps you also to make administrative decisions and programming evaluation. The quadrant on the top right is accountability assessments. You will notice that this quadrant represents assessments that are more summative in purpose and more large-scale focus. A lot of the research that I came across says that accountability assessments are the coarser grained assessments. So these are the farthest removed from the classroom. And although these assessments give us excellent data at the end of the year, these serve to give us a bird's eye view of what is happening in terms of curriculum instruction and assessment. And the way we use these data is to set up a problem to solve. These data help us to ask a question. So an example of a question might be, why are our students with disabilities doing better in reading than in mathematics? So that sets up the question. However, to find the answer, you have to go look in a finer grain type of data. Another question we might ask here is, how are our ELs progressing from last year to this year? And then how are they acquiring proficiency in English? Other factors that might be answered here about our EL's performance is, are there other factors that influence this results, like biases, stereotypes, or pervasive low expectations of this group of students? And so that sets up the question, However, you look at other quadrants of data to find the answers. The final quadrant is grading, which includes data that are used for summative purposes, and these are more classroom focused. So here we include assessments that might be summative in nature, such as our report card grades. But when using these kind of data, we need to consider the reliability and validity of these data. We know that these grades can be heavily influenced by a number of factors, which might include maybe teacher bias or weighted measures, such as some of the exams being weighted 25% of the final 6 weeks grade. Also fidelity to a grading policy, if there's a grading policy, and is there awareness to that grading policy? And you know, there's teacher discretion whether we're going to allow for extra time or extra credit, or maybe the student, there was a meet the teacher night and the teacher says, I'll give you a free 100 if you can, if your parents or family comes and then comes to the meet the teacher night, and we'll drop your lowest grade. So see how these data can be influenced and by teacher bias or by a number of factors, as aforementioned. So if we look at this 4-quadrant model again, I'd like you to be thinking, which data do we tend to hover on over the most, and why? You know, when we look at data teams at the campus level or at the district level, which data are we looking at? Are we looking at big grain data, or are we looking at fine grain data? Are we even overlapping the data? So that's the whole idea about this tool, is that you're not going to find the entire answer in one quadrant, but here's something to think about. This figure might look familiar to you, but you'll notice that one of the quadrants is emphasized. And in the 4-quadrant model, it says that it's not a balanced assessment model. It actually privileges the classroom assessment, formative assessment strategies section, because this is where the data is that's closest to our students. So this modified model suggests that we need to be placing at least 50% of the attention to enhancing formative assessment data use. Now, if you think back to the practices and the descriptions of this quadrant, the students and the teachers alike share a responsibility in the learning. So the students become more reflective of their progress, they understand the purpose for learning, and the accountability is also enhanced because these data reflect both student learning and teacher instructional delivery. And this data also allows the teacher to fine-tune and adjust instruction in real time. To summarize this section, if we are to enhance our data literacy for use in MTSS, we need to understand the purpose and the uses of the different types of data. Are the data more formative in nature, more summative in nature? Are they large scale or classroom focused? Another thing to remember is that not one piece of data will tell you the full story. So it's important, especially to remember that accountability data is just that. It's for state accountability. And the results of that, those data should only help us set up questions to be answered by looking at the other quadrants. In this section, I'm going to introduce you to the types of metacognitive knowledge that are needed to select, interpret, and use data. Now, metacognition may not be a brand new term to you. We know that it means thinking about your thinking. But in terms of what professional development opportunities we offer to our teachers, here we need to look at 3 different types of metacognitive knowledge. This first one is declarative knowledge. So this one includes what they call person knowledge, or the understanding of what are my capabilities. And these data are not always accurate, because when I'm assessing myself, I might inflate my knowledge and think, oh, I already know that stuff. So it might be inflated and unreliable. And this type of knowledge involves understanding the what. An example of a what might be, do I know the definition of database decision making? Do I know how to create a chart? What different types charts are about? And so that might just be very foundational knowledge, but for MTSS, we need to also look at professional development opportunities that allow teachers to engage in a task, and that's called procedural knowledge. In MTSS, if we're going to be using formative data, as we looked at the previous slide, where we concentrate our focus at the fine-grained level, at that 50% of the model, that we look at how are teachers assessing students for learning, and do we have the right procedural knowledge to administer a test, let's say a formative test? Do we have the right procedural knowledge to not only administer, but also interpret those results, and then put those results in action by maybe grouping our students accordingly, and then from there evaluating our results? And so procedural knowledge is just that. It's the task knowledge, or the how. And sometimes in professional development opportunities, we might get that in a structured setting, you know, with teachers pretending to be students, and now you take turns and now you become the student. However, when that teacher gets back into the classroom, do they know how a student typically reacts? And under those assessment conditions, teachers also need to know conditional knowledge. As you see on the screen, this is the strategy knowledge. It's the when and the why. And, you know, a professional development opportunity can take you so far, but this also involves in-classroom coaching, perhaps, peer-to-peer support, so that you get really refined at making decisions on the spot, knowing when to make adjustments and why you made the adjustments that you did, and how to replicate those adjustments as needed with similar types of students that have similar needs. And so conditional knowledge is a very refined level of metacognitive knowledge. And this also includes knowing why something didn't work. So in the full training of this, and the full module, you will learn a little bit more about these, but I'm hoping that I've enticed you a little bit and start you thinking about what type of professional development opportunities are we offering to our teachers? And is it just going to let the teachers leave that training with the what, with information? Or will teachers leave with the how, and being able to replicate what they did in that setting in their classroom and feeling really good about that? Or is it more about having teachers think about the what ifs, and what if this happens, what might you do, and to know what happens, what to do if it didn't work? And so those are the three types of metacognitive knowledge. I want you to think about this. The last time that you had professional development opportunities, which one of these knowledge types was the central delivery, or the focus for that professional development? And then, you know, after the professional development, we all get the evaluations and we say, did you learn something? And everyone leaves so excited about what they learned. But as we know from the Joyce and Showers framework, there's much more to just acquisition of knowledge, but there's another layer to that. It's, do the teachers actually think that those skills that they learned in that workshop or training, that those skills, that those strategies will work with their students? And then, are we going to be using them with consistency a year from now, perhaps? Because in that model also, the student achievement results that are compared to the type of professional development that teachers receive, there's a deep correlation, and there's, we need to consider doing more for our teachers, especially in the MTSS world, where we're going to have them looking at data through new eyes, and maybe having look at data to decide, movement between the tiers, perhaps, or movement towards tier 1 again. You see, so all of this is important in terms of developing teacher skill to be literate in using the data. One of the examples that I will use in this module is that we're going to introduce our teachers to curriculum-based measurement, but how to utilize these formative measures in the classroom. And so curriculum-based measurement doesn't have to be this protocol that you make copies of and you dedicate a day and you set this timer and you're marking errors. It's really looking at the in the moment instruction and what the students are producing as a result of that instruction, and then making adjustments on the spot. But this CBM is this. So let's look at the definition, get a working definition of curriculum-based measurement, or CBM. And you'll see on the slide that here we look at, it's a measure for measuring student achievement based on what is taught in the classroom. And then we compare individual student achievement to the rest of the class, to the grade level, to the school and district level norms. And as we know already in the RTI model, we're comparing student growth to a peer group. And if you've used a box and whiskers chart, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about, is that we're not only tracking individual student response, but we're tracking that student response across time and as related to their enrolled grade level peers. The beauty about curriculum-based measurement is that you can use repeated measures from the student's curriculum to evaluate the effectiveness of instruction, and therefore make adjustments, and it leads to more effective teaching methods and improved student achievement. This quotation provides a deeper understanding of CBM. Please read the slide to yourself. You will notice that CBM can be used to assess performance in the core content areas, including reading, mathematics, written expression, and spelling. So think about those core content areas, and teachers need not only they need to know the procedural knowledge for administering each of these CBMs in each of the content areas. And so not only that, but teachers also need to be able to look at the different types of graphs that are user-friendly, that can be shared with parents and family members, that can be shared with each other for that matter, to look at how are the students doing not only in that one classroom, but in a grade level, for example. So CBM enables teachers and other educators to collect data across time. And the interpretation of these data is intended to guide these instructional decisions so that teachers can make decisions often and continue to modify instruction or even terminate instructional intervention programs. In this section, we're going to present sample classroom scenarios where CBM methods are used to monitor student progress. And so if you're a special educator out there, these 7 components of goal writing might be very familiar to you, but we're going to use the same 7 components of goal writing to look at writing a goal for students that are receiving intervention instruction. And in this section, we're going to introduce you to a student named Jamie. Jamie is a 2nd grade student and is having some difficulty with oral reading fluency. And so if we look at the 7 components, we're saying something like this. We might say, in 10 weeks, using the XYZ CBM materials, Jamie will read aloud 2nd grade level material with a 1.5 words correct per minute, weekly rate of improvement, and reading at least 38 words correct per minute with 90% accuracy, so that we're able to articulate all of these components, and anyone that picks up that intervention plan can read it. If Jamie moves to another school within your district, or maybe moves to another town, that campus can receive Jamie's intervention folder and say, we know exactly where they were going with this, the who, the what they were using, for how long, what was the rate of improvement. And what I tell teachers about the ROI, or rate of improvement, it's not only sets the goal for Jamie, but it also sets the goal for the teacher. And it gives you those intermittent benchmarks to be able to assess if you need to make adjustments to the intervention, maybe to the frequency. If Jamie was receiving intervention 3 times a week for 20 minutes each time, maybe that might be increased if Jamie is not meeting the weekly goal, the weekly rate of improvement. So that helps you as well to make those adjustments. And we'll go deeper into this discussion in the main module, but this is that contextual knowledge that I was talking about earlier, where teachers need to make adjustments in the moment, because this is, again, the finest grain of the data, of the 4 data that I mentioned. And lastly, this section includes a brief discussion about data bias and data interpretation, and the teacher dispositions that are needed to adequately interpret data. And this section can fill volumes and volumes of books, and this can be days and days of training. But please note, after this brief discussion, that there still remains opportunities for you for further learning in this area. As a reminder, to be useful, data need to be accurate, appropriate, and actionable. So the accuracy of the data, it's selecting the data that you're going to present without omissions, because data cannot distort or distract. And so how do we curb bias through intervention fidelity? Well, bias can surface in many ways. When you're looking at data, are the conversations in the room more focused on asking the right questions, or seeking out maybe some reasons why you think that the students are not achieving? Is the conversation geared towards, we need to really look at our instruction, we need to look at our differentiation within the core, or are we making adjustments as needed and checking for fidelity by doing regular walkthroughs in the intervention settings? Those are some good conversations. However, what if in the meeting space where you are, the conversation kind of leads to, well, that family just doesn't care about their child's education, or other factors that are outside of your immediate control, but what can you influence? And that's the right question to ask, is like, I may not be able to impact what, you know, issues of poverty or racism or opportunity, access and opportunity. I may not be able to impact that, but I'm not going to replicate those same practices in my classroom or in my setting, right? And so when we look at data, where's our conversation leading? Because to be able to reduce data bias, we need to triangulate or overlap. And it is important that we look at a mixed methodology approach. So we're not only looking at quantitative data, but we also look at qualitative data. And I'm going to read this slide verbatim because I think it's important. And then triangulate data by overlapping multiple measures of data to include considerations such as retention history, suspensions, poor attendance, and access to highly or less qualified teachers to use as evidence for supporting a hypothesis as to why a student is not achieving in an anticipated rate. In closing, I would like to make it clear that there's a difference between assessment literacy and data literacy and pedagogical data literacy. Pedagogical data literacy says that we must not only know our content well, but we must also translate that knowledge to make use of data, make adjustments during instruction when our students are not experiencing high levels of success in learning. And then formative use data helps us to make adjustments in real time. We give those students feedback to feed them forward. I just love that. And then we also need to consider the influence of the data. Is it summative in nature, or is it more formative in nature? What was the intent of those data? And are we crossing those boundaries in that quadrant to go and refine our questions that we are asking, right? And so finally, bias in data interpretation may lead the creation of action plans that may miss the mark. And you know, we spend a lot of time developing these action plans and having these committees, but we need to make sure that we're addressing the needs of your most vulnerable, most marginalized population. And therefore, it's important to take active steps to enact policy that influences the practices and procedures that eliminate bias when it comes to all aspects of schooling, especially when it comes to interpreting results in an MTSS world. Teacher dispositions also will influence how data are handled, interpreted, and the amount of effort that will be expended in daily instruction and intervention plan implementation. Thank you for your time today, everyone. And I'll send it back to you, Michelle.
Thank you, Dr. Reyes, for your spotlight on increasing data literacy. I told you all were going to be in for a real treat. This is a great pathway. Be sure to check out the website to explore it, and keep visiting that website as we rebuild it and keep building it and explore the rest of this particular module, decision making. Stay tuned for next week because we'll be spotlighting the next module, which is academics. You have a wonderful day. Thank you.